The search for survivors of the blast in the Lebanese capital Beirut continues as the government declared a state of emergency for the next 2 weeks. Brazil's Supreme Federal Court is still evaluating a ruling that would compel President Jair Bolsonaro to protect indigenous peoples during the coronavirus pandemic. The Pan-American Health Organization has warned that the COVID-19 pandemic is having a devastating effect on the treatment of other diseases in the region. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Lebanon, where authorities ordered house arrest for a number of port officials this Wednesday, pending an investigation into the blast that occurred in Beirut on Tuesday.
On those who worked in management of the storage of the ammonium nitrate, which amounted to 2,750 tons, those who worked on the guarding and safeguarding the files from June 2014 to August 4, 2020. Securing a certain amount of wheat after the damage of the warehouse in the fire, we request the Ministry of Public Works and Transportation to do what is needed to secure the operations of import and export through the port, Beirut port, like Tripoli or Saida.
And the search for survivors of the blast in the Lebanese capital Beirut this Tuesday continues as the government declared a state of emergency for the next 2 weeks. International aid has already begun arriving in Lebanon following the devastating blast that plunged the country further into crisis. Over 100 deaths have been reported, while the number of people missing surpasses the casualties so far. Thousands are wounded as the shockwave of the explosions caused damages to buildings across half of the city. According to reports, the explosions were felt as far away as Cyprus, around 150 miles northwest of the country. The governor of Beirut, Maran Aboud, described the disaster as apocalyptic and estimated that at least 300,000 people were made temporarily homeless and that the recovery efforts would cost the country over $3 billion. The United Nations Secretary General has extended condolences to the Lebanese government and people while reaffirming the organization's support for recovery efforts.
The Secretary General expressed his deepest condolences to the families of the victims, as well as to the people and government of Lebanon following the horrific explosions in Beirut. He wishes a speedy recovery to the injured, including several United Nations personnel working in Lebanon. The United Nations remains committed to supporting Lebanon at this difficult time and is actively assisting in the response to this incident.
On Wednesday, the Iranian Red Crescent Society loaded a plane with humanitarian aid for the Lebanese people. The plane is carrying much-needed medical supplies, a medical team and a field hospital to help tackle the emergency sparked by the blast that occurred in Beirut on Tuesday afternoon. The NGO announced that this was the first of a series of humanitarian aid shipments to be sent to Lebanon.
In regards to what happened yesterday in Beirut, the first shipment of Iranian aid weighing more than 95 tons, including medical items, medical equipment, food, a field hospital, and a medical team of 30 people, will be sent to Beirut.
And Tehran's Asadi Tower lit up with the Lebanese flag and messages of support from Iran to the Lebanese people after the devastating explosions at Beirut port, which wreaked destruction across the city. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has offered condolences and medical support to the Arab nation. And on Wednesday afternoon, the Russian government also sent humanitarian aid in response to the explosions in the Lebanese capital. The Russian Ministry of Emergency said that 5 aircraft were sent carrying humanitarian aid to alleviate the consequences of the disaster. In the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russian government also sent epidemiology specialists along with a mobile lab to carry out COVID-19 tests on site. Russian President Vladimir Putin sent his condolences to Lebanon's President Michel Aoun. Meanwhile, Senator Oleg Morozov pointed out that Russia is willing to help Lebanon investigate the accident if it receives such a request. A large fire broke out at a public market in the United Arab Emirates city of Ajman this Wednesday. Local residents reported seeing a cloud of thick and black smoke from the fire that broke out at 6:30 p.m. local time. Meanwhile, civil defence teams rushed to the site in order to control the blaze. Authorities have not reported any injuries so far. According to reports, a nearby hospital was evacuated as a precautionary measure. The cause of the fire remains unknown. And we'll be right back after this short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In Brazil, the ruling which compels President Jair Bolsonaro to protect indigenous peoples during the coronavirus pandemic is still being evaluated by the Supreme Federal Court. Judges of the top judicial body have pointed out that the indigenous population of Brazil is protected by the constitutional framework. In view of this, the plenary of the Supreme Court has requested the implementation of health measures to guarantee attention and services for the different indigenous communities of the country hit by the pandemic. However, the court will hold further sessions to determine whether the Bolsonaro government can be forced to comply with these obligations.
Números vêm demonstrando que o Brasil.
Indigenous organizations of the Amazon Basin and Ecuador have launched an international campaign to stop extraction in the Amazon, which seeks to protect the environment and livelihoods of these communities.
Today we are here to demand justice for our community. We are facing again the impacts of the oil spread and the landslides.
The United States Senate Committee on Foreign Relations held a hearing on Venezuela this Tuesday to address the Trump administration's policy towards the country. The committee called the U.S. Special Representative for Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, to answer questions on policy towards Venezuela, who admitted his implication in the actions to destabilize the country and overthrow the government of President Nicolas Maduro. Meanwhile, Senator Chris Murphy criticized the Special Representative for not being successful in his task, thus confirming once again the United States' participation in the attempted coup of 2019.
And it's just been an embarrassing mistake after mistake since. First, we thought that getting Guaido to declare himself president would be enough to topple the regime. Then we thought putting aid on the border would be enough. Then we tried to sort of construct a kind of coup in April of last year, and it blew up in our face when all the generals that were supposed to break with Maduro decided to stick with him in the end. We undermined Norway's talks last summer, and then this March we released a transition framework that, frankly, is almost a carbon copy of the very one that was in front of the parties last year. And now, after wasting all of this time, we are stuck with elections about to happen that, as we have talked about today, Guaido and the opposition refuse to enter. And then we are going to be in a position where we are recognizing someone as the leader of Venezuela who doesn't control the government, who doesn't run the military, and who doesn't even hold office.
And Venezuela has rejected the statements made by the United States Special Representative Elliot Abrams and senators who attended the hearing of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Upper House, where they reiterated support for illegal interference in Venezuela's internal affairs. During the hearing held on Tuesday, Abrams reiterated his support for coup tactics and opposition lawmaker Juan Guaido, as did other Republican senators, although some questioned the success of Donald Trump's hand-picked representative. The Venezuelan government rejected the accusations made against it and once again condemned the coercive and illegal measures unilaterally imposed by Washington. Meanwhile, Democratic representatives criticized Abrams' historic failure on Venezuela. In an interview with Telesur, PhD in Law and Political Sciences Jaime Zuliaga explained that the house arrest warrant issued by Colombia's Supreme Court of Justice against former President Álvaro Uribe strengthens the autonomy and independence of the country's judicial system.
And it is very important in the country's current situation, where the court was subject to a series of political pressures by the Democratic Center Party and by other sectors of Colombian society, warning of the possible consequences if a measure of this nature was implemented. What the court has done in an unanimous decision by ordering former President Uribe to be put under house arrest is an assertion of the autonomy and independence of the Supreme Court of Justice, and this is undoubtedly a step forward in the institutional strengthening of the country.
The agreement recently reached between the Argentinian government of President Alberto Fernandez and its main creditors to restructure more than $65 billion in foreign debt will avoid a default and allow Argentina to begin to recover from the economic crisis. From Buenos Aires, our correspondent Carolina Silvestri has the story.
For the economist Andrés Asiai, the agreement reached between the national government and the big foreign investment funds will avoid a series of judicial accusations and criticism against the country's significant external debt increased by the policies of former President Mauricio Macri.
This agreement brings a release that gives air to this government, especially in these years, and at the same time without conditioning the economic policy. The discussion was reduced to how much you paid and how much you did not, the legal details, but not like the traditional pretension of creditors that alongside the IMF imposed their economic agenda. I think this was a result of how much the government of Alberto Fernandez negotiated this, how they separated the IMF from the private bonists, even put them against each other. This was an effective move.
According to the expert, the debt exchange prevents Argentina from falling in default and also entails a more stable currency exchange rates.
The everyday internal economy will depend on domestic policies, right? It is not going to happen as the previous government thought, that we were going to have a foreign investment shock, because Argentina, despite the renegotiation, it is still in a huge debt. We have the local debt, the one with the IMF. On the other side, we are living in an international crisis, a context of investment crisis. Then there is no expectation that this will promote a boom, right? The positive thing that I see is that the government will pay less attention to the debt and will focus more on developing an economic plan of internal reactivation.
This renegotiation entails savings of millions of US dollars in payments that are now available for other purposes.
In the next 5 years, we will have a significant reduction in capital and interest payments. If you add up this money that is not being paid as debt you have, local and foreign creditors, the public sector and the private sector, you are talking about savings of almost 57 billion US dollars. Obviously, this can be used to pay for the extra burden due to the pandemic, and in the post-pandemic, it could help to go back to a path of economic growth.
Many experts consider this renegotiation as a huge political and economic achievement.
When there is a shortage of US dollars, the Argentinian economy does not grow. If the demand for this currency decreases, there is a bigger probability of economic prosperity.
For the Argentinian President Alberto Fernandez, this agreement brings an opportunity to go back to a path of economic development.
Carolina Silvestre, Telesur, Buenos Aires.
Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel has announced a popular campaign against illegal acts that are further damaging the economy in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic and the ongoing blockade imposed by the United States. The president stressed that illegal activities in the midst of scarcities such as hoarding and the reselling of essential goods would be tackled through the joint efforts of his government and the Cuban people, who reject such acts on the part of a minority seeking to gain from the complicated and difficult economic situation that the island is currently facing.
It is not out of hatred or to disturb, but to prevent a few from disturbing the many. That is the objective with which we do these things. And of course, where it is not adopted, where it is confronted, and where legality is disrespected, we are going to act with all fairness but also firmly. Because the streets of Cuba are for revolutionaries and for the working people. And to those who believe that with this situation they will speak of us, actually, we can guarantee that their plans and desires to destabilize the situation of the country and the revolution will be defeated or are already being defeated by the actions of the people. Without giving in to pressure or blackmail or protest by those who want to annex the Cuban homeland to the savage north. And this is the legitimate way we are going to act against these demonstrations that are unwanted in our society.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The Pan American Health Organization has warned that the COVID-19 pandemic is having a devastating effect on the treatment of other diseases in the region. Dr. Carissa Etienne, director of the PAHO, issued the warning during an international press conference. She stressed that there are already warning signs of the lasting effect that the pandemic will have on health in the region, highlighting the suspension of vaccination campaigns, problems with pregnancy care and the treatment of non-communicable diseases, as well as shortages of drugs to treat HIV and tuberculosis.
The pandemic is also not the only health issue that we face. We are beginning to see warning signs of the devastating impact that the pandemic has had on other diseases. We know from experience that natural disasters and health emergencies can fracture and quickly overwhelm health systems, often with grave consequences.
Tropical storm Isaias pounded the east coast of the United States on Tuesday with heavy rain and strong winds, cutting power to over 3.1 million homes, and has now reached Canada, downgraded to a post-tropical cyclone. At least 4 people died as a result of the storm. Wind gusts up to 78 miles per hour wreaked havoc across eastern states of the US, littering streets with debris, closing roads and forcing the cancellation of scores of flights. Public transport services were also briefly suspended, including New York's famous Staten Island ferry. Isaias quickly moved up the east coast after slamming into the coast of North Carolina on Monday night with hurricane-strength winds before being downgraded to a tropical storm. The governor of the U.S. state of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, has announced steps to combat racism, which she has described as a public health crisis.
An executive order to create the Black Leadership Advisory Council of Michigan, which I will work closely with to develop our policies and paths to opportunity for Black Michiganders. Today, I also signed an executive directive declaring racism as a public health crisis in Michigan. I want to thank the Michigan Legislative Black Council for their leadership. This pandemic has confirmed and highlighted the deadly nature of these pre-existing inequities caused by systemic racism. We have a lot of work to do to eradicate the systemic racism that Black Americans have faced for generations. And it's going to take time. But the most important thing we can do during this time is work closely with leaders across the state in every community to find the root cause of problems and work to eradicate them.
Heavy rains and flooding in the capital of South Korea have left 13 people dead and forced more than 1,000 to leave their homes. The Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters reported that over 200 mudslides were registered in the city of Seoul and low-lying areas. The current monsoon season, South Korea's longest in 7 years, hit the country with 42 consecutive days of rain and left almost 6,000 hectares underwater, as well as highways and bridges in the capital. Scientists have linked the current extreme monsoon season to climate change, which has also caused extensive damages in China, Thailand, Myanmar and India. Angola's government reported another 64 COVID-19 cases on Tuesday, noting the growing spread of the coronavirus in Luanda province. According to the National Director of Public Health, 58 of the 64 new cases are people from different districts of Luanda, which has reported a large number of locally transmitted infections. The remaining patients are from the northern province of Serra. One further COVID-19 fatality was also reported in the capital, bringing the death toll to 59. Meanwhile, authorities reported 27 new recoveries, bringing the total to over 500. Angola has confirmed a total of over 1,300 coronavirus cases since the beginning of the outbreak. Kenyan health authorities reported 671 new COVID-19 cases this Wednesday.
Some 671 people have tested positive from a sample size of 6,200 in the last 24 hours. That means that today Kenya has 23,873 positive cases. Our cumulative tests now stand at 329,123. 633 of those people are Kenyans, while 38 are foreigners.
And Kenyan health authorities also noted that a total of 723 Kenyan health workers have tested positive for COVID-19 since the outbreak of the pandemic.
As of today, we have 723 healthcare workers, 385 of them who are males and 338 females who have been infected by COVID-19 disease. That is about 3% of the total caseload.
Ghanaian Prime Minister Ibrahima Kassory Fofana expressed his support this Wednesday for the candidature of current Guinean President Alpha Condé for the presidential elections to be held in October. Prime Minister Fofana appealed to President Condé to contest the election during a two-day convention of the Rally of the Ghanaian People Party. Meanwhile, Condé has asked the party to allow him time to decide whether to run or not. The president is nearing the end of his second five-year term in office. A recent referendum on amendments to the Ghanaian constitution prolonged the presidential term from 5 to 6 years.
This is the starting point today for a new, bright and promising future for Guinea and Guineans. We are proud to be the vectors of the new hope for our country and our people.
He is a man of progress, he is a man who's proven himself, and we have seen it. So why not let him work? Why not let him finish the good intentions he has for this country called Guinea, which belongs to all of us?
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and on our YouTube channel. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.